cracking. We've got an hour together today. So I'm going to talk about ethics in PR and communication, so broader communication. In particular, PRCA has recently revised, we've recently revised our code of conduct. So I'm just going to highlight a few of the changes there so that everybody is aware of those changes and what they entail for everybody across the profession. Hopefully we can call it a profession. See if my sorry, let me just get, sorry, this is, the heat is affecting me. The heat is making my brain go slightly wonky. So so today's session, we'll talk a bit about the new code and ethics and the revised code. I also train for the public affairs code as well, which we can touch on if people are more from that side professional, although we do a separate public affairs code training session as well. And then just at the end, ignore the 40 questions bit because we are in the process of rewriting those in line with the new code, because it's literally hot off the press because the new code is so new that we're updating it. But we'll finish with some general dilemmas and some thoughts and some time for chat. So you don't just have to hear me waffle on for the entire hour. You get to get your thinking caps on and come back on some ethical dilemmas that we talk about. And really, sorry, just to, sorry, let me go that way, me as well. And just to explain why you get me as opposed to anybody else. Look, there are lots of people that could do this. And in fact, the PRCA have lots of fantastic trainers. And I think I'm right in saying that the summer sale is still on. Sorry, this is the cheap plug for PRCA training sessions. The summer sale is on at the moment. So if you are, as long as I don't put you off during the next hour, I run a number of courses, but there's some fantastic trainers that the PRCA uses. So if you're interested in training, then now is the time to get those bookings made. But as well as being a PRCA trainer, I am a public affairs practitioner. And I've been involved in public affairs since the sort of late 90s even. Crikey, that makes me feel even older than I am. But I'm also on the PRCA board, and I'm the treasurer as well, member of the CIPR and the PRCA, and a chartered PR practitioner. So hopefully lots of things, and I've written about public affairs and communications as well. So hopefully lots of experience which I can bring to the next hour. And look, I've got slides that I will go through, say, talking about the code and some ethical dilemmas and putting it in, hopefully, in some context and just a few things that you need to think about in your day-to-day jobs. But look, honestly, if you've got questions or queries, do feel free to put them into the chat. If they sort of fit with what I'm talking about at the time, I'll try and deal with them sort of then and there, or alternatively, I can save them up. And, we can save the questions until the end and when we talk about the ethical dilemmas. So do feel free to put those into the chat. Right. So, why are you here? He says. It's not an existential question, but on this webinar in particular. And I think the answer is really that, a strong ethical foundation is required to everything we do. Like from day one in the profession, right the way through, you never sort of grow out of it. You should be thinking about these things literally every day. Now, hopefully ethical dilemmas, challenges don't come up all the time. But if you've got it just whizzing around in the back of your mind, you're just always aware where these issues may crop up. And that's important because it means that it informs your actions. It informs the way that you behave at work. It informs the way that you deal with colleagues. It informs, the way that, you deliver your advice to clients. Now, not all of these things are covered by the PRCA code, I hasten to add, but you want to grow and develop as an individual. You want to gain a career, hopefully, in PR and communications. So if you can start off on that right footing, if you can have ethics at the heart right from the start, then that will stand you in fantastic stead as you go through and as you deal with more challenging situations, both in your company, the consultancy, or in-house, or for the clients that you deal with, or the advice that you deliver. So I think, that's fundamentally why we're here. Let's get those foundations right. Let's get everybody thinking around the right things and thinking about those ethical challenges to get us all on the right track. Now, look, there are sort of different ways that ethical dilemmas, can come up. It's easy to just to take things for granted and not and ignore them. It may be that, you know, certain excuse me, sorry, we're in the heat now as my voice is going. It may be that in certain, you know, you learn from colleagues, you know, maybe when you learn from colleagues, you're not sure about what they're doing. Maybe you challenge those in some ways, because we all have a personal responsibility where it comes to ethics and seeing that ourselves and our organizations adhere to those higher standards. So we're all accountable, I suppose is what I'm trying to say, for the ethics that we hold, but all our organizations, you know, as well. So look, I say today, the next hour is about understanding some of the sort of trip hazards, some words there which may you know, resonate as well, or might be used when we come to dealing with ethical challenges as well. So get ourselves on the right track. Now, ethics aren't morals. Now, morals are sort of refer to individual behaviors. So, you know, medical ethics, for instance, or, you know, where your, you know, your personal principles, if you like, that you may or may not do certain types of work. Some people won't work in certain sectors or for certain types of companies, or, you know, defense, or tobacco, or whatever it happens to be. They're your morals. That's you know, entirely up to yourself. And very often, you know, certainly when I've dealt with those sort of issues with colleagues in the past, you come to an accommodation so they don't do pieces of work in that area, for instance, or maybe they choose not to work for a company if they know that company, you know, deals with, for instance, you know, clients along those sort of lines. But ethics are has a more of a structure. There are more rules around that for appropriate behavior. So normally they're, I'm going to say policed. I don't quite mean in that sense, but sort of lowercase policed by an external organization, i.e. the profession. So in this case, the PRCA. So they are slightly different things, but ethics have a clearer set of a code that is set out so you can more easily follow it. And why do we have a code of conduct? Well, there are a number of reasons. One is, I mean, the slightly facile answer is, frankly, is so you know what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. So you can be accountable for the behaviors, your decisions, your organizations as well for their behaviors as well. And really importantly, I think for PR, because you don't need in that sense a qualification. Anybody can claim to be a PR person. For me, following that code of conduct, being able to put a, you know, a logo at the bottom of your email, or whichever way you want to choose to do this, is the difference between being a professional and being just another, you know, some sort of cowboy that just, you know, sticks up a sign in their window and says, "Hello, come and talk to me. I can sort your PR for you." We're better than that. You know, we are professionals. We have a profession. Therefore, we follow the code of conduct. And it means that we can be held accountable for that. And so that will be held accountable for that by the PRCA, but also for the outside world as well. You know, if people see that you're behaving unethically, then they won't work with you. If you're behaving unethically, then, you know, certainly my, you know, main bit of my day job in public affairs, you know, why would a politician work closely with you if you behave in an unethical manner? Well, they're not going to, are they? Civil servants won't, maybe the media won't work with you. So in other words, it helps us to be better at our jobs. It helps us to build relationships as well, I think. You know, and frankly, for a lot of us, you know, this is what we do. It's our job. It's you know, it's what we make money at. It's how we earn a living. So if we can do the right thing and continue to earn a living from it, then I don't think that can be, excuse me, any bad thing. Now, the PRCA's approach to these things is hopefully, say, you know, it's light. We're not heavy-handed. The idea is that we don't involve ourselves in every, you know, aspect of your, you know, day-to-day lives, or every aspect of your, you know, professional life, or anything along those sort of lines. So what we've recently done, the PRCA has recently done is set up a revised code, and the revised code replaces the previous iterations to hopefully be clearer, shorter, more concise, bit easier to understand. And there were a few areas in the old code that people didn't quite get, didn't quite understand, or maybe it was a bit ambiguous or whatever. So the idea being that we've revised that to make it much clearer. And in particular, we have a new standards committee as well. I'll come on to a little bit about that in a second as well. But that new sort of standards committee is to look at the code of conduct and the procedure for looking and investigating complaints as well. So we have to realize that, frankly, actually, if you have a code, there has to be some way of it being enforced and looked at, and that's through the Independent Standards Committee. So it's more comprehensive, I think, and gives more independence, which, again, arguably under the old system, maybe wasn't there in quite the same way as it should have been. So as an organization, we're much more comfortable, we're much more confident in this new standards committee type approach. And the standards committee instructed a law firm. So this isn't just sort of us looking at the old code and through a sort of a PR professional lens looking at these things. Of course, we have done that, but by getting a law firm to look at it, they looked at the old code. They updated, they looked at, they sort of benchmarks against other codes of conduct and other rules, such as the other professional bodies, and best practice more generally where it comes to code to lead to the revised and updated code. So I'll come on to some of the main changes in a second. But what I did sorry, let me just note what I was going to say there before in this heat that idea pops out of my head completely, which would be a bad idea. So this is a change. So this is I think a culture change for the PRCA, certainly. So we are working through some of these things ourselves still, and I think that's fine. And in terms of the complaints process, that's independent. That's across to the standards committee to look at that, which takes it away from the board, which I'm a member of, and others that may have been involved before. Gives it more independence, more impartiality as well, I think. But equally, what I'm not going to do here as we go through, not least because this is all quite new, my idea today isn't to go through and say, well, this is what you should do and this is what you shouldn't do. And if somebody comes up with a question, I'm not going to interpret the new code, the revised code. Feel free to ask questions. I'll answer to the best of my abilities. If there's something I really can't understand or don't know, then what I will do is go back to the team at the PRCA and I will double check that for you. So that would be, so it's not me making stuff up on the hoof, which I think is quite important, especially in the early days of the revised code. And we've also got Louise on the call as well from the PRCA, who more generally, I would say, maybe this is something I should mention at the end, but I'll mention it now just because it sort of fits here, which is if you find in a day-to-day setting you have a thought, you're not sure about something, then talk to us at the PRCA, get in contact with Louise, and we can try and help as best we can under the new code. If it's something that we're not sure about, then we'll pass it on to the standards committee or relevant people. But the idea isn't this isn't bureaucratic or anything along those sort of lines. So do feel free to have a chat, and we'll see what we can do and advise to the best of our abilities. So, and I think, yep, Louise has just popped her details, her email into the chat there as well, so you can see how to get hold of her. Let's see if I can move on to that. So the revised code. I'll read this. So some of these bits I'll read out just so it's nice and clear, and then I'll explain because that's easier. It's a condition of membership that members will abide by the provisions of the Code of Conduct. Members are required to adopt and observe the standards and principles set out in it and must thereby endeavour to observe the highest professional standards in the practice of public relations and communications. Look, that's hardly surprising, but it is just a little reminder that if you are a PRCA member, you sign up to the code. There are no ifs and buts. So a little bit similar. If you are a member of the PRCA and you do public affairs work, then you are covered by the Public Affairs Code, for instance, which incidentally is going to be, updated in a similar style shortly as well. It's the plan. If you're a PRCA member, you're covered by the Code of Conduct. Therefore, it is incumbent upon all of us to understand what that code is and what it says and how it impacts on our jobs, what we do in-house, with clients, whichever. So look, let me just flick through a few of the main changes to the code, some of the main aspects of the code. Clause 5, members must support the PRCA standards and principles by bringing to attention of the PRCA as soon as possible any serious breaches of the code or the Public Affairs Code of which members become aware. Now, so this imposes a new obligation on members to inform the PRCA of any serious breaches. So that's pretty common. Sorry, I went into a bit London there. Sorry, that's pretty common across similar organisations and similar codes. And the idea is that we collectively raise the standards by bringing to the PRCA's attention any issues which might need taking action on. Now, it is not that every issue that's raised it instantly becomes a complaint. You know, there is I suppose, a triage process in place. And just the bit that I was going to mention earlier on. So, for instance, sometimes it might be about, some people might think, look, non-payment might be an area of complaint. Now, probably isn't unless it's a serial complaint, but as a for instance, PRCA members do have access to an advice line run by Lewis Silkins about non-payment. So in other words, there are things that we can do to try and work through issues rather than instantly becoming a standards committee referral and a complaint, etc., etc. So if that's a worry, it needn't be. So there are things that can be done. Clause 7. Professional and associate members must act with professionalism at all times and must maintain and demonstrate their competence to practice in the profession of public relations and communications. And combined with the later clause, don't worry about that bit, builds a commitment to training and CPD. So that's a new obligation that means that you have to act with that professional capacity. Sorry, speaking properly would really help. Professional capacity and expertise. So in other words, people take the time to invest in their own training and CPD and continuous professional development to make sure that you keep up to date with developments, to keep up with the latest. For instance, if you're more involved in social technology, social media, it may mean that you, rather than sort of saying, well, I can do any of these things, yeah, because I can do some, Facebook, I can do this and that. Well, that's not true, is it? We all know that. So actually, rather than sort of trying to, again, stick yourself out there as an instant expert in these different areas, actually you take the time to build your competence, to build your professional expertise before going out there and selling yourself as an expert in, whatever it happens to be. And clause 8, incidentally, which I haven't put here, is about sort of, CPD as well. So, members, undertake CPD, and we would encourage people to continue to do that, as well. So, think about your CPD options as well. Clause 9, members must act promptly to correct any erroneous information disseminated for which they are responsible, which deliberately, whether deliberately or inadvertently. So again, the current code and charter, which was there before, which is no longer in place, already include an obligation that members should ensure the accuracy of their work and shouldn't disseminate misleading information. But the new code just goes that a little bit further and says, look, actually, when you see that, even if it's accidental, you try and do something to put it right. Now, again, this is something that is in line with we think industry best practice, across other professions as well. And look, we appreciate that sometimes, let's say it's a media piece that hasn't, that you try and get corrected. They may choose not to. I mean, there is that. as well. But as long as members can show that they have done their very best to act in that prompt way to try and sort out that issue, then we know that they've tried to act in the best, to the highest possible standards. Some things are outside your control. We understand that. Clause 15, confidential information must not be disclosed unless specific permission has been granted or the disclosure is required by law. Confidential information must not be misused or used to the advantage or prejudice of others or for a member's self-advantage. So that's again another addition about confidentiality. Just spells it out. I mean, I think it was sort of there before, but maybe wasn't as clear as it could have been. This revised clause just makes that need for confidentiality much clearer. There's also clause 16 as well, which I haven't got on there, which I should probably add anyway. Clause 16, and that's an expanded version of the current obligation of members to take all reasonable care for professional duties are conducted without causing offence on grounds of gender, race, religion, disability, or other forms of discrimination as well. So again, not that it wasn't there before, but I think just a clearer expression of the need that we all have those requirements in the way that we operate with colleagues and with clients, across the piece as well. And I say, one of the main changes I think is obviously the creation of the standards, committee and the way that complaints are handled. So it's confidential. It's independent. There's an initial consideration phase and mediation if necessary, as I mentioned. So, there may be ways that we can, I was going to say avoid the need to go to the standards committee. I don't mean that in some sleazy, let's try and stitch it up type way. What I mean is working through an issue and working through the problem without the need to refer to the standards committee, because some things can be sorted out between parties in advance through some sort of mediation. And that is, acceptable. If that isn't the case, then of course it will go to the standards committee and they will look at it. They will establish a panel to have a look at and examine the complaint, in detail. And there are requirements behind. Again, one of the challenges that I think we've had in the past is the process of making a complaint, if I can put it in this way without, it wasn't necessarily clear who the complaint related to, or maybe where it had come from, those sorts of things. So the new complaint handling system, and again, look, I'm giving you a very broad brush, during the course of the hour today. So I would encourage you all to go and have a look at the PRCA website and have a look at this in more detail. This is just an introduction, just trying to familiarize everyone with some of the main, issues. But what I would say is go and have a look at that, because you'll see. So, for instance, there's a checklist around the sort of information that is required when making a complaint, that sort of thing. So again, this new complaint handling procedure, hopefully fairer and clearer all round. And look, I've concentrated on the sort of the PRCA code, obviously. This is the PRCA session, but equally I would encourage you to look at other organizations as well. Now, there will be other types of or other areas of the communications professions that you may be involved in. So you may do some direct marketing, you may be involved in advertising, you may end up doing a lot of sort of data work or mail outs and those sort of ideas. Now, or if you're on maybe on more TV programs and those sort of ideas, then it might be more of an Ofcom sort of issue. So sorry, apologies. What I'm trying to say is that whilst absolutely you adhere to the PRCA, you're a PRCA member, you adhere to the code, that doesn't exclude you from having to pay attention to other requirements which are in place through those sorts of bodies as well. I often find the Institute of Business Ethics quite useful because they have a website and they do updates regularly. So if I'm in that sense thinking about my CPD and considering myself, which I have to do as well, about ethics and keeping up to date and thinking about some of the challenges, then I look at the Institute of Business Ethics website and their updates. But I'm also aware that if I'm doing work, and my work often goes into different sectors, you know, there are requirements around the way I behave in those sectors and for that sort of work, you know, as well. And I think just generally, we've just all become a bit more aware, I think quite rightly, of ethics. Now, whether it's because, you know, social media puts a spotlight on the behavior of companies, whether it's, you know, there have been some high profile cases around bribery, whether it's because, you know, expectations among younger generations of the types of organizations they'll buy from or deal with have changed. You know, in that sense, I sort of don't care. I just see the outcomes of those things, which is a ratcheting up of the requirement to adhere and behave in an ethical manner. And you know, why should PR be any different from any other profession? Um, and it shouldn't. And indeed, and I've mentioned, you know, in a public affairs setting, but equally, if you're dealing with the media, trust is really important to everything we do in PR. And therefore, we can underpin that trust through ethical behavior. And that might be in, say, dealing with clients, it might be in the advice that you deliver, it might be suppliers, colleagues, etc., etc. So, you know, that ethics should come into everything we do. But I say, but be particularly aware when you're going into, you know, that don't ignore the requirements in other parts of the profession, not just the PRCA. I'm trying to say. And so we've got ours. The CIPR have got a code as well, which I'd encourage you to look at. ICCO have got a code as well, and the PRSA as well. So look, we aren't the only ones. You know, we think we're very much up there in terms of our code. But look, you know, you might be CIPR members as well. I'm a CIPR member as well, just for, you know, full transparency. So I make sure I don't believe there's any difference between the two in that sense, but I do make sure that I look at their code regularly as well and see how they, you know, how they sort of implement their code through examples, principal points, and then examples as well. So have a look at those. Sorry, what I was going to say. What's really interesting, and this is I would recommend that everybody does this every now and again, is look at some of the rulings that I've got one here from the ASA, but I've got some other ones which I'll just, you know, flick up in a moment as well, from IPSO and Ofcom and some other more statutory regulatory bodies as well. We're voluntary, they're statutory, in other words, law. But I think what's really interesting is if you look at some of the ways that these rulings come about, so the complaints and why have they come about? Because the more you can see complaints that have been made, upheld, rejected, etc., the more that you can see where these ethical dilemmas may come into your work and what is acceptable or unacceptable. So, for instance, here on some ASA rulings, we've got, you know, again, for those that are, you know, do a lot of TikTok and online, you know, ads, it's just not always very clear that the posts are ads. So here we go, TikTok video on somebody that I don't know's account. Apologies, it's probably a Love Island person, something like that. Was not obviously identifiable as an ad, as an example. But equally here, we've got posters for Calvin Klein. The complaint about being the objectification of women. So again, a couple of examples there about where ethical dilemmas, ethical issues may come into your day-to-day work. There's a couple more. IPSO, again, similar. Some of the IPSO ones recently, so this is more on the media side of things. Have a look at the, I think this, well, actually, I tell you what's really clear on something like this is the time lapse. So the difference between when the complaint is made and when the complaint is heard. Now, we as the PRCA with our code will try to move quickly, because we appreciate the, but obviously, some will be easier to rectify than others. Again, quite appreciate that. But here on some of these issues, it takes a long time, and that means it can be expensive for those complainants and those involved in that. So again, if you're doing work that ipso, media work here, the newspapers, etc., might come in line with, then, well, actually, what are the implications? Well, the implications are not just a complaint and reputation, but cost and time and effort and all those sorts of things as well. So again, the more that you behave in an ethical manner, the more you are aware of these things, the more that is moving through your mind as well. You're avoiding some of these negative consequences that aren't just about reputation, but further away as well, I think. And also sometimes you may end up in a place where a client, for instance, is saying, well, I really dislike that piece of media coverage, and I want to complain about it, which obviously they would be, in that sense, as long as it is, does have a problem with accuracy or privacy or something along those lines, they may well be entitled to do. But from a client's perspective, when you're advising those things, you're advising internally as well, you would have to point out the delay, the cost, etc., on both sides as well. So again, just have those sorts of issues in mind as well. Ofcom, similarly, is worth looking at. So if you're doing more on the broadcast side of things, and actually, I think the one at the top, I need to replace, because I think I'm not sure it was this one, but actually I think this guy, Dan Wootton, was found, I think, if it's this particular one, I will need to double check, was found, or certainly a previous complaint or a different complaint was found to be not in breach, but on that one, I think he was in breach. So if you understand why these people are found, or why these outlets are found to be in breach, then you can avoid that. You can avoid the language or the behavior or the imagery, whatever it happens to be. You can avoid all those things. So again, you're behaving in a much more ethical manner and avoiding the consequences that come with complaint, not just to ourselves but to other regulatory bodies as well. And they're often around hatred or abuse or gender discrimination as well. And again, we have to remember that with the statutory bodies, you get big fines and sanctions as well. That's a pretty big part of the way that they behave and the way that they operate their codes. So as I mentioned, look, if you've got a damaging media story, look, your client may say, well, we'll write to the editor or the sub-editor. Yeah, that's fine. We can do that. But they may ask you to, sue for libel. Well, look at the problem that Prince Harry's, excuse me, got himself into, by trying to do those sorts of things. And look, if you complain to ipso, whatever it is, are you just drawing attention to it? Again, does that actually help anybody? And to maintain the highest standards, then you need to point these things out as well. So again, I paraphrase hugely here, but if your colleague or client just said, look, this is what we want to do, and you go away and do it, well, I'd personally would feel uncomfortable about that. I don't think that fits, because I think, somebody could well say, well, look, you didn't explain to us, the costs. You didn't explain to us the reputation cost for this course of action. You didn't explain to us that potentially, I don't know, depending on what the story is, obviously, that this person's journalistic colleagues have effectively sidelined us. They don't talk to us anymore. You didn't tell us that actually by taking this path of action, we've created more coverage. We've become a target in a way that we want. Those sorts of things. And again, that's about professional behaviour, which is just, as I mentioned, is sort of I think, quite clearly covered in the code. I've already mentioned a few of those that deal with complaints. Most of which are, not all of them, but many of which are statutory codes. IPSO and Impress for the print, ASA for advertising, Ofcom for broadcast, but the BBC as well. That has it sort of regulates itself through the trust, through its BBC Trust, and there's BCAP as well. So again, depending on what sort of PR you're doing, which branch of PR you're involved in, you will have other requirements as well, which you need to pay attention to. So what you really need to do in any of these things is, I think, have some sort of instinct for it. Now, the instinct, I think, will be built over time. Nobody expects anybody in the profession to know, straight away. But by, say, improving your CPD and looking at the, for instance, the Institute of Business Ethics, by working in the sector longer, by knowing the code. Today is part of that process, but also reading it, spending time with it, coming back to the training every now and again just to refresh your memory, but also just applying some common sense. And I could answer that, I think, asking some questions as well, either of colleagues or of ourselves or of the PRCA, and in that way, if you're not sure about how things are developing, or if you have a challenge or a query, again, worth just thinking through that. So by doing those things, he says, I think you end up in a better sort of ethical position, because ultimately the code is upheld by you, really. I don't mean you, but I do mean you and individual practitioners. We are responsible for our own behavior, so we have to get that right. And again, as the revised code points out, if we see what we think is unethical behavior, it may not be. We may just not have full, sight of all the facts at that point, and that's where that sort of mediation-y process, if you like, can come into its own. But we have a duty to report it as well. So we maintain our own standards, but we maintain the standards of the industry as well. And look, it might be that there are different types, if you like, different motivations, different types of cases that can end up before the standards committee or be referred to. Sorry, let me get my terminology right here. That people may think are issues for the standards committee to look at, i.e. a standards committee complaint. But they might not be. But that mediation process will help us to understand that. So, for instance, it may be that something around, consistently unpaid invoices are complained about. Now, you could have a scenario where maybe like a one-off, that's, that wouldn't necessarily qualify. That might just be an admin issue or an oversight, or maybe some discrepancy between, the type of work, or the initial agreement wasn't very clear, or all sorts of different things. Whereas if there's a consistent failure to pay, well, okay, that might, I'm not preempting what the committee may or may not say, but that might be an issue. If there is an issue of substandard work, or work that's been lifted from others, or something along those lines, again, that may, a one-off may just be a dispute that can be worked through, but consistently, okay, well, that's, that might be a different matter, altogether. But you move into an area where it's sort of, where, again, I can use an example from the sort of the public affairs code as well. But look, if I'm sort of saying, there's a part in the public affairs code, for instance, that talks about, not overstating your, links to government. So effectively not selling your little black book of connections, political connections. Again, I paraphrase slightly, but that's what it's sort of there to do. Now, whereas I'm going around telling everybody that I'm, Keir Starmer's busy mate, and we went to university together, and he comes around here for a barbecue on a Sunday, None of that is true, I hasten to add. um, you know, that, well, that's pretty bad. That seems, you know, not good behavior, and then may well trigger that sort of standards committee complaints. So look, what I'm trying to say is some of these things, you know, you have to work through. You have to work through. And to be honest with you, I think as the, you know, as we build a you know, in under the new code, a sort of almost a bank of examples, I could put it like that, a bank of examples that will help us to explain more clearly to members as well about the sort of, you know, what's triggered, you know, a case, and, you know, what the outcomes have been, that side of things. And again, that will help us. Obviously, we would all prefer that we didn't have to do any of this stuff. I mean, we would all prefer that we would all act in an ethical manner, and, you know, none of these issues come up. But, you know, that's not real life, is it? You know, these things come up, unfortunately. And there's also the challenge of the, you know, those that aren't members. Now, of course, we can't do anything about those that aren't members, you know, obviously. But the more that we can, hand on heart, say our own members adhere to this, that helps us in that sense with the non-members. If that, you know, if I've conveyed myself clearly there. So look, you know, general principles, doesn't matter if you're agency or in-house, individual member, there are a number of different sort of classifications, if you like, of membership of PRCA. Its integrity, its competence, its confidentiality. I could add transparency to those sorts of issues, particularly on the political side, you know, as well. You know, just being clear, just be clear with people. That, you know, that has to be part of the ethical approach. I appreciate we're getting towards, we've got about 15 minutes left. Look, I say, look, do interrupt with you know, questions if you want to type those in. But I wanted to just give a couple of sort of dilemmas just for us to sort of pop on the chat, which I'll read out, and I'll then give you a little few moments to just put your thoughts and reactions into the chat, see what you think. So the first one, look, during a media interview, a CEO mistakes a key fact about the organization's capability, making it sound far more advanced than it really was. It's not intended to mislead, but the fact is now a part of the published story. If that was you, what would you do? How would you behave? And Lisa, I've got a question from Lisa here. Oh, by the way, sorry, just to say, this session is being recorded. I should have probably said that right at the start, but I think you probably got your warning. This session is being recorded. So when I'm not going to read out people's full names. I'll just say first names, and then we'll go from there. So hopefully that helps people. Lisa, I'll say I'll deal with your question in a second, if I may. But anybody got any thoughts on that particular dilemma? So during a media interview, a CEO mistakes a key fact about the organization's capability, making it sound far more advanced than it really is. Not intended to mislead, but the fact is now part of the published story. What should you do? What should they do? Sophie is suggesting issue a correction to the editor. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Any other responses to that? A couple of other thoughts have come through, agreeing with Sophie there. Yeah, look, I agree with that. You know, it's a correction. Now, again, look, you know, depends. It might be a broadcast one, you know, that becomes slightly more difficult. You know, it's a correction. Look, there are other things that you may think about doing as well. I'm not saying any of these are right or wrong, but these are other considerations. So if you really wanted to go that extra mile, if you really wanted to be clear, you may indeed put something on your or your client's you know, website, you know, as well. Rather than just issuing a correction, you may put something on social media as well. You may put that correction across social media. You may decide to you know, you could do, I don't know, you could do your own little, you know, Q&A interview, live streamed, or, you know, or just made available, again, just to clarify that from, you know, the chief exec as well. Not quite an apology maybe necessary, because it wasn't, you know, it wasn't intended as to mislead or anything like that, but that correction. So, you know, there are a number of different things that you could do, but the important point is correcting it. Quite right, thank you. Sophie. And Lisa, sorry, just to answer your question, does the revised code of conduct replace the professional charter is considered part of it? It's just the code now. So the code is it. The code is everything. So that's what you refer to. Let's move on to the next one. One more about behaviour. A PRCA member believes that another rival firm is being critical of them and of their behaviour. On further investigation, it emerges that a senior member of staff left the firm and joined the rival. What should be the approach? What would you suggest there? And just to say, when we think about some ethical dilemmas here, there's always judgment. There's always matters of judgment. So unless the code is, sometimes, when you look at the code, that is very clear on, for instance, professional behaviour, etc. So, there's no room for interpretation there. Other issues, it's sometimes not that clear. Sometimes it does need a chat and sometimes does need to be worked through. So just, so we've got a couple of things here. So Sophie again, gather the facts from both sides, refer to the Independent Standards Committee. Mary is suggesting a personal approach at best here. Question. Yeah, look, it might be that actually, yes, a sort of a bit of mediation, personal, is the best way forward. And it could be that the two firms together try and, at a senior level, try and have that discussion. That might not work. Of course, that might not work, especially if there's sort of some personal animosity. Sometimes if people have moved from one firm to another, and everybody can get a bit tetchy now and again, can't they? So yeah, that might be it. In which case, okay, yeah, it might be that it has to be referred to the PRCA and a potential one. But again, even that would then go through some mediation. So maybe as the two individuals, it didn't work, but with the PRCA side of things involved, maybe that would help work through it. So almost an independent third party, if I can put it like that, would enable those discussions to be had to get through. And then at that stage, if that's still not working, then depending on the nature of the the issues involved, the committee may then choose to take it up. But again, we might, as both of you have said, we might be able to work through this first. Good, thank you. Let's do another one. Let's do another one. An anonymous complaint is made about the behaviour of a PRCA member. The complainant is insistent that the Standards Committee immediately gets involved, as they believe a member is working for a current client under sanction by the UK government. What should be the approach? Crikey, there we go. Some of these are straightforward, some of them are not straightforward. Look at that. So anonymous complaint is made about the behaviour of a PRCA member. Complainant is insistent the Standards Committee immediately gets involved, as they believe that the member is working for a client currently under sanction by the UK government. What should be the approach? Any thoughts? See, nearly 3:30 on a hot Wednesday afternoon. What could be better than thinking about issues like this, and on a probably lack of coffee by mid afternoon? Just wait a few more moments for people to put some thoughts in the chat. Yeah, Sophie, again, gather facts. What was the behaviour? Yeah, exactly. We don't know what the behaviour was. We don't know what the behaviour was. And also, we need to, PRC would definitely need to know who the person is they're doing the work for. So did it breach the code of conduct? Yeah. And in fact, yeah, no, you're right. As I was coming to you, Sophie, you're right there. Try and find out if the person does in fact work for the client under sanction. That's almost the heart of this, which is, can you, who are they working for? So is it really a sanctioned person? Well, we don't know that. So that's the sort of, when I talked about the complaints earlier on and had a look at the complaint process yourself, yourselves, um, that's the sort of information that would need to be looked at. It can't be, and it can't be anonymous. We need to find out, because look, who knows? This person making the anonymous complaint might be literally trying to create problem for somebody they don't like very much. I don't know, as a for instance. So there's a lot to unpack here, and it's not always necessary. And that's why we have put this new process in place. Is because sometimes these things are really complicated, but we do require more information now about the complainant and the complainee and the complainant, if that's the right way around to say it as well. And on something like that, look, if they really are working for a client under sanction, then in some senses, without wishing to be too derogatory about the PRCA are the least of their worries. If they really are doing that, working for a client under sanction, then the UK government and its authorities will definitely have something to say about that as well. So look, I am sort of conscious that we're coming towards the end of our time, so I do want to leave. So please do put questions in there as well. I'll go through one more just as you're thinking about your questions as well. So here, one final one. Look, a PRCA member representing a bicycle manufacturer gives an expensive not an expensive journalist to a bicycle, an expensive bicycle to a journalist to influence the columnist / blogger to write favourable articles about the product. Is this considered a bribe? What do you think about that one? And Sophie, just to say, yeah, the code is written down somewhere and available to read. And if Louise can pop something in the chat, if not, we will follow up with it to everyone there so they know where to find it on the website. There we go. Sorry. Yeah. Louise has just put that into the chat there. Sophie, ASA, Mary. Yeah. Absolutely. Shouldn't be accepted. The blogger has to say it was a gift to Sophie. Yeah. Look, I mean, again, often several layers to unpack on something like this. Now, it may be that so some people will lend the journalists the bike and then just have and again, very clear paperwork trail, I would suggest. So, you're giving it to them for the review. You're going to ask for it back, basically. And you want some paperwork to make sure that they know that it's coming back. So effectively, it's a loan, if you like, if you want to put it in that sort of, sense. Because I think what you don't want to have happen is that the journalists in some ways. So let's say you loan it to them, but at the end of it, you think, well, actually, that was quite a nice review. They can keep it. I'm not saying you should do that, by the way, but I'm just saying, if that were to cross your mind, actually, I'm pretty skeptical about that as well, because if journalists, bloggers were to get to know, and they're often, in a sector, there's often a small number of these sort of opinion formers, if you like, and they know that actually if they write a good review, you get to keep it. Well, that's the same as a bribery, isn't it? So you may issue the paperwork in the first place and say it's a loan, but then effectively you give it to them anyway. Then that's pretty poor. That's not, that is, I think, is still, potentially, a bribe. So I would always, in that sense, take it back. And Sophie's, and she's saying, "Oh, that's quite good." Oh, sorry, I've hit up on an example that chimes directly with, with Sophie's experience. I'll just read this out. I worked for a bike brand, and we always lent the bike to bloggers for review. It didn't guarantee a positive one. Yeah, sadly. That is right. We also created our own paperwork to ensure that it was given back. Sophie, I think that's fabulous. I think that would be absolutely, at the top of my list of sort of ethical behavior, and making it clear to all concerned that it's coming back. And I personally wouldn't put myself in a position where, it was given to them, even despite that initial initial reassurance. So thank you for that. That's really, really helpful. Any questions, thoughts, queries, anything that I can try and answer or can't answer? We try that now. No, often in the past, we do have the question test at the end of this session. But I say, unfortunately, you're either lucky or unlucky, depending on your view of the world, that that's not quite ready yet, because we haven't quite finished updating it yet with all the with the new code. So maybe you think that's a good thing. But if you do have any thoughts, questions, queries, things you want to follow up with today, do feel free to drop Louise an email. Louise just popped her email in the chat again there. Or myself, I'm eminently Googleable, let's say, and on the board and treasurer and all these sorts of things as well. So I hope that's been useful. I hope that's just introduced you to some of the thoughts and processes, but most importantly to the new code, made you aware of the new code. So say take some time with it, read it, consider it. And other than that, I would just like to say, look, thanks for your time today. That's really kind, especially on a warm day. And I know some of you are in parts of the world where you've had some difficult events in the last few days. So again, thank you to you as well for still being able to come along. So other than that, thank you for your time, and hope to see you soon. Cheers. Bye bye.